Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to join you in today's seminar on regenerative agriculture that is organized by Solidaridad Japan. Firstly, I'd like to thank Solidaridad Japan, especially Mr. Satokan and Himedi-san, for inviting me to give a presentation on regenerative agriculture for annual and perennial crops. This is the outline of my presentation, starting off with setting the context and defining regenerative agriculture, and finish off with some thoughts on scaling up of regenerative agriculture for a perennial crop such as oil palm. Regenerative agriculture is not a new concept. It grew from the organic agriculture movement. It was conceived by the Rodale Institute in the 1980s in the US as a system going beyond sustainable agriculture. It's a holistic approach focused on soil health and agro-biodiversity. Soil health came into focus during COP21 in Paris, when the International 4 per Thousand initiative was launched in December 2015. The 4 per Thousand initiative believes that through carbon sequestration by plants and forests, an annual increase of 0.4% in soil organic carbon in the topsoil could be key to reducing global carbon dioxide emissions. Regenerative agriculture has been gaining traction, especially in the past 5 years, and is being implemented in many annual crops and some perennial crops. But today, there is no universally accepted definition of regenerative agriculture. Now, who is driving regenerative agriculture? In my opinion, major consumer good manufacturers, together with processors, have been playing a key role in raising awareness for the need for regenerative agriculture in supply chains. Collectively, through the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative platform, or the SAI platform, which consists of 190 food and agriculture companies globally, have embraced regenerative agriculture through their Regenerating Together program that was launched in 2024. And some consumer good manufacturing companies also made corporate commitments to source regeneratively produced products in their production of consumer goods. For example, Nestle has announced that 50% of the key ingredients will be obtained from regenerative agriculture by 2030, and they're making good progress. In 2025, they have achieved 21.3%. Unilever has also announced that they will be using regenerative produced ingredients for many of their product lines, such as the Hellmann's mayonnaise, which will use regeneratively produced soy and rapeseed, and the Knorr bouillon cubes, which will be using regeneratively produced vegetables. Some brands, such as chocolate manufacturers, have even put on their labels that their products has been regeneratively produced. These are examples from Western corporate brands. How about Japanese companies? Are they also driving regenerative agriculture in their respective supply chains? For example, I know that Saraya Company has been promoting regenerative agricultural practices among our palm smallholders in Malaysia. And Suntory is a member of the SAI platform and is sourcing regeneratively produced barley as a feedstock. Taking the cue from sourcing of sustainable palm oil based on the RSPO system, I think there is a possibility that regenerative agriculture requirements may become part of corporate procurement policies. As I mentioned earlier, the regenerative agriculture has been gaining traction recently, but there's no universal definition of regenerative agriculture. Thus, there is a concern over many fluffy claims that's been made, and also the risk of greenwashing. In order to gain definition through consensus, the Regenerative Agriculture Initiative, together with the Carbon Underground Organization in the United States, have conducted several multi-stakeholder consultations to arrive at a common definition. And this is a process-based definition that they have produced that has been adopted by more than 130 signatories. The SCI platform has also come up with a definition. They have produced a working definition, which is based process-based, outcome-based definition, which is focused on soil health, biodiversity, climate, and water resources. And this could be used by their members to develop their own respective corporate definitions. When defining a definition for regenerative agriculture, due consideration must be given to the underlying principles. But as in the definition, there is no universally accepted set of principles for regenerative agriculture. If you do a Google search, you have a lot of different answers. But interestingly, many of them were boiled down to a few common principles. In fact, the 5 principles seem to prevail, 4 of which wish to be focused on soil health, such as soil, organic matter, and carbon. And the 5th is on integration of animals and livestock, as shown in these 2 graphics. Newton and his co-workers in 2020 have analyzed about 230 scientific articles and practices in the practitioner website to try to find out what are the underlying principles for regenerative agriculture. And from this analysis, they found that the key concern areas are improvement of soil health, to increase increase biodiversity, and to increase carbon sequestration. Moving from principles into practice to require a structured approach, structured frameworks. And some corporations such as Nestle and Unilever have designed their own frameworks and guidelines for consistent global deployment of their regenerative agriculture commitments. Collectively, the SCI platform has also produced a more flexible framework, which is focused on soil health, water, biodiversity, and climate. And the approach is a 4-step approach. The first step being context analysis to identify the key material criteria. Secondly is looking at the outcome selection based on the outputs of the context analysis. And thirdly is to be practice adoption, selecting appropriate practices that will deliver the outcomes we selected earlier. And last but not least is monitoring evaluation, which is important to monitor the progress of implementation against continuous improvement plans. Historically, regenerative agriculture practices have been developed for temperate arable crops, such as cereals, which is often integrated with livestock. These practices will not be entirely applicable for perennial crops, such as oil palm. This table gives a subjective rating of the applicability of various regenerative agriculture practices for arable crops and oil palm. Of course, for arable crops, all the practices are applicable, but several practices may not be applicable for oil palm cultivation, such as crop rotation, minimum tillage, and planting of hedgerows and green buffers. The integration with livestock and agroforestry may be challenging in many situations. And with regard to irrigation, it may not be applicable because the oil palm is a rain-fed crop unless it is planted in less suitable climatic areas. Agroforestry is often been advocated as a shift away from monoculture. Essentially, it is agriculture with trees. And this is the agriculture system which looked at planting of multi-layered canopies of tree species. The highest level being occupied by forest trees or tree crops. Then the understories will be planted with crop plants such as coffee and cocoa. However, this may not be applicable for, be easily applied for oil palm, which actually behaves as a tree in itself, and it's difficult to underplant the oil palm with other trees. Instead, multiple cropping could be practiced, such as planting oil palm together with other crops in the same piece of land. Could be more suitable alternative. As I mentioned, integration of livestock is an integral part of regenerative agriculture systems. Rearing livestock such as cattle in plantations is not a new idea. In fact, it's been part of the national agricultural policy for Malaysia to improve farmers' income and to improve food security. And efforts have been made since the 80s to encourage smallholders to integrate with livestock, and they've been given financial assistance since the year 2000. Although there is traction among smallholders, there is little interest among the large plantation companies. Considering that oil palm livestock integration could contribute to 7 UN SDGs, there has been renewed calls to adopt this practice as a silver pastoral practice. To find out the relevance of regenerative agriculture to oil palm, I have actually done a desk study whereby I have aligned the best management practices against the key impact areas for regenerative agriculture, which was prioritized by the SCI platform at soil health, looking at soil fertility and biological activity, water resources, optimal use of water, and the reduction of pollution or preventing of runoff, biodiversity, promoting diversity of plant species above and below the ground, and climate change, focusing on reducing GHG emissions and enhancing carbon sequestration. I've tried to link the BMPs against the impact areas as minor, moderate, or major impact areas in this table. The high impact, positive impact BMPs are no planting of palm or forest land, which contributes no deforestation, no planting of peatland of any depth, which will minimize the GHG emissions of such land, and also maintenance and conservation of high conservation value and high carbon stock areas such as set-asides. Other BMPs that are aligned with the impact areas for regenerative agriculture include the implementation of integrated pest management, which is a standard practice now in plantations, where priority is given to using biological control, such as use of barn owls for controlling rats, and use of physical and cultural methods to try to reduce the dependence on the chemical application. In the immature phase, leguminous cover crops are usually planted in oil palm to protect the soil and to enhance the soil fertility with organic carbon and organic matter, and also to fix nitrogen from the air through a symbiotic relationship with rhizobial bacteria. And the use of oil palm waste, such as the anti-food branches and other organic waste, as organic fertilizers and mulch in the oil palm areas. So overall, there is strong alignment of oil palm best management practices and the production of regenerative agriculture. So in my opinion, regenerative agriculture for oil palm and sustainable agriculture should be taken as complementary systems and not mutually exclusive. We should build on the similarities. As oil palm is in the third or fourth replanting cycle, greater emphasis should be given to plant health. The implementation of regenerative agriculture have to be verified systematically through either on a B2B basis, self-verification by brands and using their regenerative frameworks and indicators, or through third-party certification, such as use of voluntary systems such as the RSPO certification system. For example, WWF is using the RSPO principles and criteria as the basis for operationalizing their proposed framework for regenerative agriculture for financial institutions. There are also regenerative agriculture specific standards, such as the CIC Regen Agri Standard, which has to date certified more than 2.2 million hectares of cropland, especially for cotton cultivation. And the Rainforest Alliance has recently launched the Regenerative Agriculture Certification Scheme. Both these certifications will be discussed in subsequent presentations. Now, on scaling up of regenerative agriculture, recently there is a growing interest in the oil palm sector, especially smallholders. Smallholders have been getting good support from civil society organizations and many players in the oil palm supply chain. And many smallholder-based projects have been implemented recently in Malaysia, Indonesia, and other oil palm growing countries such as Nigeria. A notable project is the Biodiverse and Inclusive Palm Oil Supply Chain Project under the Livelihoods Fund in Indonesia, which has attracted the support across the supply chain. For example, the brands such as Mars, L'Oreal, and Danone are involved in supporting this project, and it's been co-implemented by NGO, SNV, and the grower, Musimas, and ICRAF itself. However, many of these initiatives are in the pilot evaluation stage, and proof of concept is necessary before upscaling of these initiatives can be done. With regard to plantations, at present there is no consensus on the relevance of regenerative agriculture for oil palm. As I mentioned, there is much overlap between sustainable agriculture for oil palm and regenerative agriculture. And some are questioning whether regenerative agriculture could bring additional benefits to oil palm cultivation. There's also a perception that regenerative agriculture has been driven by brands as a commercial approach towards rebranding their products. And lastly, there is a concern by companies that additional certification may be required for implementing regenerative agriculture. We have to bear in mind that in the oil palm sector, there has already been multiple certification systems for sustainability, such as the RSPO certification system and national standards such as the Malaysian Palm Oil, Sustainable Palm Oil, and ISPO, as well as other systems such as the Rainforest Alliance system and ISCC. Ladies and gentlemen, this is to conclude my brief presentation on regenerative agriculture for annual and perennial crops. I started by saying that regenerative agriculture has been gaining traction recently, but yet there is no common definition for regenerative agriculture. Perhaps in retrospect, it may be unrealistic to expect to have a one-size-fits-all definition, bearing in mind the diversity of cropping systems, different soil types, and climatic regions, and also the need for contextualization. Instead, I think it may be more realistic and more practical to try to agree, have a consensus on what will be the key impact areas and outcomes for regenerative agriculture, especially for regards to soil health, water resources, biodiversity, and climate change, especially in terms of sequestration of carbon. With regard to oil palm, I've already mentioned that there is a lot of overlap, significant overlap between regenerative agriculture and sustainable palm oil production. Thus, it's critical that we leverage on the similarities and build on the additional benefits that regenerative agriculture can to make palm oil truly sustainable. With that, thank you for your attention.